When people talk about the Second World War, they talk about total war, ideology, and unprecedented destruction. But even in the most brutal conflict in human history, there were rules. Rules about prisoners, rules about the wounded, rules about civilians. By the time World War II began in 1939, Germany was bound by the 1929 Geneva Convention on Prisoners of War. This treaty laid out clear standards. POWs must be treated humanely. They must receive food, shelter, and medical care. They cannot be tortured for information. However, here's something many don't realize. The Soviet Union had not signed the 1929 Convention on POWs. When Germany invaded the USSR in 1941 under Operation Barbarossa, the Nazi leadership argued that since the Soviets were not signatories, Germany was not legally bound to apply to those rules to capture the Red Army soldiers. The result? Millions of Soviet POWs died in German captivity from starvation, exposure, and execution. This legal argument became one of the most catastrophic interpretations of the convention in history. In contrast, British and American prisoners captured by Germany were generally treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. Camps like Stalag Luft II, later made famous by the Great Escape, followed the structured regulations. POW mail was allowed. Red Cross packages were distributed. Prisoner representatives were elected. The reason? Reciprocatory. Germany knew that thousands of German soldiers were in British and American custody. Mistreat Allied POWs, and German prisoners might suffer the same fate. The Geneva Convention, in this case, functioned as a mutual deterrent. The International Committee of the Red Cross conducted inspections of POW camps across Europe. Inspectors visited camps, interviewed prisoners, and reported violations. However, here's the crucial detail. Their authority depended on the cooperation. They could report abuses, but they had no enforcement power. And notably, the Geneva Convention did not fully protect civilians in occupied territories at that time. The stronger Fourth Convention protecting civilians would only be adopted in 1949 after the war. This legal gap had devastating consequences across occupied Europe. In 1941, German forces were issued the infamous Commissar Order, directing them to execute captured Soviet political officers immediately. This order directly violated the protections of prisoners of war. It marked a shift from conventional warfare into ideological warfare, where certain enemy categories were denied legal status entirely. At the post-war Nuremberg trials, such actions were prosecuted as war crimes, in part because they violated established international law, including the Geneva Framework. The disturbing thing is, the Geneva Convention did not effectively protect millions of victims of the Holocaust. Why? Because the 1929 Convention focused largely on uninformed prisoners of war, not civilians systematically targeted by their own government. The industrialized murder carried out by the Nazi Germany exposed massive weakness in the industrial humanitarian law. It was only after World War II that the world expanded protections for civilians in response to what had occurred. Despite violations, the Geneva Framework did not collapse. Instead, the horrors of World War II strengthened it. In 1949, the international community revised and expanded the conventions, creating the 4 modern treaties we know today, including comprehensive civilian protections. In a paradoxical way, the brutality of World War II forced the world to clarify the rules of war even further. The Second World War was a conflict where ideology often overrode law, and where legal protections depended heavily on who you were and who captured you. The Geneva Convention did not stop the brutality, but they shaped how millions of prisoners were treated, and they laid the legal foundation for post-war justice. Even in total war, the idea of limits survived, and that survival changed international law forever.